Good evening. I'm the Texas Deaconess. Today is November 10th, 2013, a beautiful fall day in Texas. We're going to study a little further tonight on our series of women in the Bible. Tonight we're going to look at Martha and Mary, close friends and followers of Jesus. Both Martha and Mary belong in the gallery of famous Bible women. It was to Martha that Jesus first declared, "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this?" And this is in John 11:25 and 26. Countless millions down the centuries have been comforted by these words, first received by Martha. Now that's a very important point. Jesus said this first to Martha, even before he said it to his disciples. To her sister Mary goes the distinction of having anointed Jesus before he went to the cross. Though this loving attention to Jesus, Mary showed every evidence of knowing more of his secret power and wisdom than even his disciples did. Because of this, she is held up as one of the most spiritually sensitive women in the New Testament. Bethany, where the two sisters lived, was a quiet little village on the southeast of the Mount of Olives, beside the Jericho Road. It was a short and pleasant walk from here over to the Mountain Olives to the temple at Jerusalem. We can almost picture the house where Martha and Mary lived as one of the most comfortable in Bethany, for there is evidence that they were women of means and gave their means as well as themselves for Jesus. The house was probably two-story with a well-shaded court, and it was here that Jesus often paused to refresh himself. Both house and garden were inviting, for Martha excelled as a homemaker. And when we look at the stories of Martha and Mary in the New Testament, the house is spoken of as Martha and Mary's house and their brother Lazarus. You know, usually in Bible times, the house was spoken of as belonging to the man. Although I cannot back this up with scripture, I feel like possibly their brother Lazarus was impaired in some way, either mentally or physically, that made Martha the head of that household. She and Mary were as unlike in disposition as Esau and Jacob had been. While Martha was practical and unemotional, Mary was impassioned and imaginative. Martha was the older, and she took the lead as homemaker. Possibly Martha was a widow, and Mary had never married. Despite their differences, Martha and Mary exhibited a close bond of sympathy for each other. Like most attentive, eager-hearted, and affectionate hostesses, Martha strove for perfection around her house, especially when a guest that the family loved as much as they did Jesus came for a visit. Mary was the more pensive and quieter of the two. Craving fellowship of the Spirit attuned to his, Jesus stopped one day at the home of the sisters on his way to the Feast of Dedication. Martha seemed busier than usual, while Mary sat in deep humility at Jesus' feet, drinking in his every word. Martha, like most busy homemakers, became concerned that Mary sat idly by while she had to do all the work. We can assume that Mary was not selfish in her withdrawal from homemaking, because she knew that Martha had the ability to carry on without her. And it was in Martha's house in which they lived. Instead of gently asking Mary to help during the rush period, Martha turned and said, "Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her, therefore, that she help me. And that story is in Luke 10:40. And Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed, and Mary hath chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her. In these few words, we have a careful explanation of the character of the two sisters. Probably Martha has prepared too lavish a meal when a simple one would have sufficed, and Jesus was more interested in food for the soul than food for the body. Yet Martha was tender in her service for the Lord. You know, when you have two different people, as these two sisters were, each was showing Jesus what they felt was their best. And you have to remember that. The fact that Martha was in there busy, she was giving Jesus her best. The second scene in the New Testament in which Martha and Mary figure prominently is in John 11:1-46. This is their most triumphant scene, for it deals with the raising of their brother Lazarus from the tomb. And it was here that Jesus declared to Martha, Whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Martha, a woman of great discernment, responded with one of the most magnificent confessions of faith in the New Testament. Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into this world. Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days when Martha learned that Jesus was approaching on the road to Bethany. She went outside the village to meet him, while Mary remained behind in the house. Martha spoke to him, saying, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother would not have died. Where have you laid him? Asked Jesus. And they said unto him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. The shortest chapter in the Bible. And two sisters became the first named women recorded in the New Testament to witness Jesus' expression of grief for a friend. They knew their brother had been Jesus' well-loved friend. They also realized that Jesus was grieved, not only at their brother's death, but also at the indignation and unbelief of some of the people who were there. The sympathy of the two sisters must have been comforting to Jesus. Although their temperaments were poles apart, now they were one in spirit, and Jesus understood and loved both of them. And as they stood there looking at the recessed tomb of their brother Lazarus, a tomb carved horizontally in a rock with a slab to close the entrance, they remembered the promise that they would see the glory of God. And that's John 11:40. And they did see it. Lazarus walked from the tomb, heavily bound in his grave clothes, and Martha and Mary heard Jesus say, Loose him and let him go. They were witnessing the forerunner of a similar miracle, when the Father himself would call Jesus from the tomb. The loyalty of the two sisters meant much to Jesus and to the other believers in Bethany, who looked to Martha and Mary for leadership because they were close friends with Jesus. In the third and final scene in which Martha and Mary figure prominently was the last feast in Bethany, 6 days before the Passover. Both Matthew and Mark say that this feast was in the home of Simon the leper. Because Martha was a notable housewife, the banquet was entrusted to her. You see, not only did she entertain lavishly in her own home, she was called upon to be in charge of entertaining at other homes. In this last feast at Bethany, Martha and Mary were the central figures with Jesus and with Lazarus. Many had come out of curiosity just to see Lazarus, but Martha and Mary there were to express gratitude because Jesus had raised their brother from the dead. Mary, to express her adoration, took a pound of very costly ointment and came softly behind Jesus and poured the precious perfume on his feet, wiping them with her hair. Mary was following the custom of the time, that of refreshing guests at banquets by pouring cool and fragrant ointments on their head and sometimes their feet. She knew how Jesus' enemies despised him and were drawing him into their net, yet she did not try to dissuade him from going to Jerusalem. He who had brought back her brother Lazarus from the grave would not willfully try to gasp at his own mortal life. Then these two sisters heard Jesus say what has been called the loneliest sentence in literature. Let her alone against the day of my burying, has she kept this. The implication here is that some of the ointment was left to be used in the preparation of the body of Jesus for burial. Though others, including Judas, had criticized Mary for being so extravagant and not given the wealth to the poor, Jesus praised her for the gift to him, who, unlike the poor, would not always be with them. In his appreciation of her gift, Jesus invited others to enjoy God's many blessings, not only the lovely things of the earth and the sky, but also such a creation as a fragrant ointment. Odd as it may seem, in a little while, Judas would accept 30 pieces of silver, the equivalent about $20. The silver was from the chief priest. With this, Judas set in motion the crucifixion. Although Mary and Martha were very different in their attitude and their actions, both loved and served Jesus, their Lord. Have you made the decision to serve the Lord? The choice is up to you. The choice to serve him is yours alone. Whether you choose to serve him as a Mary or a Martha or a Lazarus or someone else, make the choice to serve the Lord today. May God continue to bless and forgive the United States of America. May God continue to bless the Republic of Texas, and may God continue to bless you and yours.